Okay, so letting go is a big topic. It's coming up in all the memes. People are talking about it, in terms of doing shadow work and, changing the way you think and feel about things. Just let go. When you're going through those really heavy times and you feel like your world's falling apart and sometimes you scramble to put it back together, but people say, just let go, just let go. And, why is it so hard? Why is it so hard to let go? And because the actual act of letting go, when you at a point where everything's prepared and the stage is set and the timing is right and the stars aligned, letting go itself is not the hard part. The hard part about letting go is knowing what the alternatives are, right? Because you won't let go if you're hanging by a thread on the cliff and you've got nowhere else to put your feet and nowhere else to put your hands and no stability, no support. Letting go is a really scary idea. And in the philosophical sense, it's like God will catch you. Have faith in the Force, young Skywalker. To let go and to float into that infinite intelligence takes a big leap of faith, let's say. It takes a lot of courage. Okay? But, it doesn't have to be that way where you let go, you fall, maybe you fall to your death and maybe you don't. Maybe God catches you. I think what it really means is that you let go of everything you think you know to be true, and then you fall into a larger scale of awareness, a larger belief system, a larger structure of a larger reality, let's say. And that includes, your personality too. And so if any of you have been practicing meditation or any type of spiritual practice and you've had the experience of popping out of your body, for example, or a mystical experience where your identity blends and basically dissolves into the all, let's say, then all of a sudden you have a whole new perspective on life, and it's very easy to let go of all those things you thought were important because now you have a different view, right? It's just like, when we hear about the stories of astronauts going into space and they see the view of Earth in whatever shape it is, they have a whole new perspective, right? Whether they see a ball or they see a disc is up for debate, and we're not going to even bother with that because how's that? I don't think that's really relevant. It's not going to help you in the context of this video, at least. But if you're looking around and whatever shape Earth is, if you look out into that vast emptiness of space, where there's apparently infinitely more space than there is matter, then it changes the way you view things, and I'm sure that when you look back at the Earth, you'd go like, how long has that been there? And what's it been through? And, what is time? Like, my perception of time has just gone from, my lifetime and the human race's lifetime and maybe thousands or millions of years to, billions of years, and, these massive time cycles that we can't even conceive of, And so, like, what's life doing, in that scale? What's its values in that scale? What if there was a mind of God? What would that believe, from that perspective? And so these are huge frames of mind to get into, where all these little beliefs of the blues and the reds and the rights and the wrongs and the lefts and the rights and the round earthers and the flat earthers, it doesn't, it's meaningless in comparison, all those ideas, because why would you condense and shrink down into these tiny little belief systems when there are much larger containers to put your beliefs into, right, that are probably a lot more useful. And so one of the things that we find when letting go of our past self, let's say, ideas, values, behaviors, beliefs, frames of mind, perceptions, paradigms, when we start to let go of all these things, we move from a more concrete way of thinking, this side or that side, I'm pro this camp, or a negative that camp. We move into more abstract ways of thinking, where it's not just off and on, it's off, on, off, off, on, and neither, and or both, right? And then once you've got that handled, then it's also through time, forwards, backwards, sideways, and multiple timeline. And then you get into these abstract levels where you start to see that what you thought was fixed in reality is malleable, and it's plastic, and it's flexible, and it can change, and it does change, and you see that it's changed, and then your mind opens up, so you can start to go, well, what else is there, right? If what I thought was my truth, my beliefs, and this is what society believes, and this is how it's always been, then now we're getting all these alternatives. I really can't believe the flat earth thing's coming up again. I thought we dealt with this like in the 1600s or the 1400s, whatever it was, but here we go again. So we've got an alternative to the consensus reality. But if you can have an alternative to the consensus in a multi-dimensional universe, why can't you have many, many possibilities, And one of the things that we know about when we get into quantum physics, quantum mechanics, is that the observer has an effect on reality, right? And it's probably the thing that isn't accounted for in science as a, Newtonian physics science, but is now becoming more and more accepted and more mainstream. And so whatever you decide is your paradigm, your perception, your belief, that's what reality starts to take the shape of. That's why when you hear people who've had near-death experiences, if they're a Christian, they'll see Jesus or Mary, and if they're a Buddhist, they'll see the Buddha. And if they're a Hindu, then they'll see, the Hindu gods. And if they're atheists, they might see a relative, right? And if you have other alternatives, you might see some psychedelic deity, right, talking to you and guiding you through the afterlife or back into your body. So be careful about, not be careful, be careful, but just don't settle for the alternative because that's all there is, right? Well, that's all you think there is. Because there are so many possibilities, right? It's like when you get into your computer and you start creating artwork, there's millions of shades of those colors on your palette, and you can pretty much scrape any image or there's so much, there's so many images, there's so many videos out there, there's so many blogs and articles that have been written, there's so much material to create from, and you can create you can literally create anything now, right? So why would you settle for an alternative belief set that typically someone has created, not so much because the alternative belief is any better or more useful, but because there's a market out there for people who don't like the current status quo, that are going to jump ship to something else, and they just want anything else. They don't really care if it's good or useful, right? They just want something different because the current consensus reality is too painful, maybe, or boring, or whatever. And so, if you're coming from the point of view of mastering yourself, mastering your life, then the only time you use a preset program is because it serves you and it saves you time, right? Or perhaps you enjoy using it, right? But really, what you're looking for as an energetic artist, let's say, which is just a label, and is that you would be looking to see what you can create, either from scratch or to innovate, or to hash together and hack together elements of other good ideas and pieces of art together to create something that's just a little bit different, that's something that's a bit more interesting than what's been placed out there. Because with these alternative ideas, what I see is there's a lot of people that are kind of lost in their, spiritual journey, let's say, or they're not even on a spiritual journey. They just wanted something else other than the mainstream consensus reality. And so they look around for groups where their quirkiness and their differences are going to be embraced. And so they're not even really interested, and then maybe perhaps they don't even truly believe in the alternative belief. But what it's doing is it's serving a purpose of them being being connected to a group, right, or being part of something, right? It's fulfilling the need of being lonely, right? And so this is why we see a lot of people, get off track and they don't do the work anymore because they're having a need met, right, that wasn't met under the current paradigm. And this is kind of a trap, right? This is why I think part of the process to self-mastery is being alone, having time alone, solitude, right? Dealing with that feeling of being lonely, dealing with that feeling of not being connected to anything, and ultimately coming to the realization that everything's connected, right? But to really own that, to really go, yeah, everything's connected, we're all one, and to live from that place, you need to experience and honestly feel what it feels like to be alone, be in empty space, be connected to nothing. Some of the most powerful meditations I've had that have made the biggest difference in my life is where I felt the sensation of being floating out in deep space without any stars, with absolutely nothing to grab onto, not even my own identity. Okay? And that's a profound, not necessarily a pleasant, but definitely a profound experience, because shit like that really changes the way you see things and the way you interact. Okay? And so, coming all the way out, like, if you can get comfortable in the empty space, the nothingness, the vast infinite black space, which a lot of people think is what death is, right? When you die, it's just empty black space. There's nothing. There's no personality. You cease to exist, right? But when you've been there, you realize there's something there. It's just not what you think it is, right? And it's still you, but it's not the you think you are. And so this is something that I think everyone needs to go through at least once to gain some perspective. Just like, like I was saying before, the astronauts, when they get off world, it changes you. It reorganizes you to a new paradigm, a new scale, a new mindset, a new level of conscious awareness. Because when you have such a large container like infinite space that everything can fit into, then you don't have a bias or a prejudice over belief systems, as an example. You just see them as tools. You see them as, dies in the reality extrusion machine where you can interchange them. And some are useful for some purposes and some are not useful for other purposes. And some are robust and will, are very strong, and they will hold up against a lot of scrutiny and a lot of criticism, and others, are quite delicate and subtle, and you need to be careful with them. But in the end, they're just beliefs, right? They're just beliefs. It's just like you have all these types of cars that we drive. Some are, none are really better than the other, depending on what you're needing them for, right? So people say, it's a Lamborghini, it's the best car, for example. Well, not if you're going off-road, unless it's an off-road Lamborghini. But then even still, if you were driving down the streets of a third world country, then you'd probably want something that blends in a little better, that isn't going to attract attention and have someone come up and key the side. So there's all these different ways of looking at it, and it comes down to what your outcome is, what your goal is, what your purpose is, what you decide your purpose is, what you decide your goal is. And your goals and your purposes will change based on your perception of who you think you are. And sometimes letting go of who you think you are is a little scary, but it can be the most liberating thing that you've ever done. It can be the most difficult thing you've ever done, but it can also be the most liberating thing you've ever done. And or it might just be certain aspects to your personality that you need to let go of, certain ideas that limit you. That give you access to whole new vistas, whole new worlds, whole new realities.